that he got out of that house in that world and created those songs and made that music is an unbelievably incredible, impossible task.
You know, it's obviously the 20th anniversary of Kurt Cobain's passing, and I want to sort of emphasize the idea that, you know, ultimately this is an anniversary about somebody that died, you know, somebody that was a father and, you know, a brother and a son and a friend to a lot of people. And so, you know, it's really easy for popular figures, you know, people in popular culture to be, you know, sort of turned into something else. But let's remember today that it's, you know, this is a very personal day for a lot of people.
Kurt mentioned that Nirvana got an excellent response over in Europe, and I did manage to spend a week with the band over there, and I have to say the audiences totally went off, and their shows just kept getting crazier and crazier. From my perspective, and having seen Nirvana play their first show in Seattle, which was at the Central Tavern in early April to about, you know, 5 people, his songwriting and the band's live performance just grew exponentially. And by the time they had zigzagged throughout Europe for 6 months in November and December of '89, they were really in top form. So this interview happened about a month or so after they got back from Europe, and the Hub show was absolutely incredible.
Well, what was the date on the interview?
January 6th.
Okay, that must have been at the Hub show.
Yep.
Okay.
Was that the famous shot
where
that
I took
you have?
the stage
Stage
diver,
diver,
yeah.
Yep. Absolutely incredible show. They were in peak form at that time.
Yeah.
And banned for life from any University of Washington venue after that show, apparently.
Why? I don't remember.
I guess because they destroyed some equipment that was the UWs or something.
Okay.
Well,
that makes sense.
on that tip, in June of '89, prior to this event, they were banned from the Moore Theater for 10 years at the Sub Pop Lamefest showcase with Mudhoney, Tad, Nirvana. So.
And then they were also banned, at least Novoselic was banned from the Seattle Center Coliseum for, there was like a Neil Young show or something, and he got completely out of control. And he literally told me the story of when they were backstage in that incredible show in 1992 at the Coliseum. There was a picture of him backstage on a list of people that had been banned from this venue, and here he was going on stage.
I'm sure many of those bans were lifted after September '91.
I wonder if you guys could, in any order, talk about the first time they ever met Kurt or Nirvana, if you remember.
Well, I think Jack's going to jump way ahead of anybody
I guess,
here.
Yeah, I'll jump in the head of the line there. Well, I just got the phone call, although, to be honest, I don't remember right now. I think the phone call was from Kurt and not from Chris. And he just to call and book time at the studio, that's all it was. It says, we're friends of the Melvins and we want to come up and record. And, oh, by the way, Dale is going to be playing drums with us. You know, he's helping us out. And I thought, well, okay, so the drums are going to be taken care of, so this can't be bad. So, because I was a big fan of Dale and the Melvins, you know, so I thought, you know, this is a pretty good start for whoever the heck these guys are. Yeah, they've got Dale helping them out. So, you know, that was it. And that probably was, I'm imagining it would have been early January or something of '88.
January 23rd.
Well, that was the session, but I don't know when the phone call came in, you know. Something around that time, a couple weeks beforehand. But, you know, the session itself only lasted 5 hours, and I don't remember very much about it. You know, it was, 10 songs in 5 hours. Do the math.
Not a lot of time for conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I actually had the first time I met Kurt was actually before that. In the fall of '87, I was down in Olympia, and a friend of mine, Candace Peterson from K Records, introduced me to Tracy and Kurt, some friends of hers. And I remember Tracy was wearing a Melvins t-shirt, and she did most of the talking, and she introduced Kurt as a roadie for the Melvins. So that's how I knew him. I got a chance to enter their Pear Street apartment, and it was real interesting. It's kind of thrift store bohemian, lots of turtles and rats and pets everywhere, rocker posters on the wall, Queen, Rolling Stones. It was kind of an odd mix of punk, thrift store, and commercial hard rock. It was an interesting vibe, yeah. But he was a sweet, sensitive guy, pretty quiet. Like I said, his girlfriend did most of the talking. I had no idea that that was the guy when I first heard the demo. I didn't piece it together till I finally met him again.
And we have that demo up in the gallery right now, actually.
Play it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few copies floating around.
Oh, you don't have? I thought you were going to cue it then. I thought that was you were ready to go with.
Not quite prepared.
That's fine.
No, come on, get it going.
I guess I first met Kurt doing a promo shoot on Bainbridge Island for Sub Pop. And I'd photographed the band live previously before that, but I never actually talked to Kurt that night. And he was just sweet, unassuming, kind of shy, just, yeah. Pretty quiet. He was very quiet. I don't think I think it was later on he kind of opened up, but early on, I remember one time he came to a little party. I had a loft on 2nd Avenue just around the corner from Sub Pop, and he came to a party. It was kind of afternoon, but then we all went out later that evening to Rebar or the Vogue or something. But yeah, he just kind of sat on the sofa and smoked cigarettes and didn't say a word. And we were all, kind of like, is that guy all right, sort of thing. And I guess that's the way he was quite a bit.
He was the voice of a generation.
That's true.
But he was kind of quiet.
Yeah.
I'm more of an observer and came far later than these guys, but I remember the story, and that I thought was one of the funniest things that has ever happened to me was at one point Tracy Miranda took me to the Pear Street apartment and showed me where they lived and showed me all these kind of places, and which you guys had seen, contemporarily at the time. And we're in the garage, and this is in 1998. Now Kurt's been passed for 4 years at that point. And she looks up, and there's some of his stuff in the garage. There's Kurt's tent. His camping equipment was still in this garage because his stuff was in such tatters, which was really, truly remarkable that there was still, and she goes, that was my tent. I bought that tent. And just amazing that the idea that there were still bits of that.
I'm actually kind of amazed at the idea of Kurt camping. So.
I think I saw that tent on eBay last week.
Yeah, or the skis on Craigslist. Yeah.
If not, you'll see it next week. So, which is actually kind of a funny story. I was in 1992. I met a woman in the UK. I was on a job there shooting a band, and we fell in love. And she visited me in Seattle and went back to England, and she took a cardigan, much like that one, just some crappy old thrift store cardigan of mine, and she ended up selling it to somebody for 75 pounds, saying it was Kurt Cobain's. So, and I was like, we really needed the money at the time, so I was like, good on you.
So Charlie, at the Rocket, when was the first time that you guys were sort of aware of Nirvana?
Well, with Love Buzz, there was a test pressing, and I don't know who on our staff got that. I honestly, it may have gone up on eBay in the last couple of years, but there's a test pressing of that. Bruce was coming in and bringing those test pressings. I have a few of them at home still, and they were all in these white sleeves and unmarked, and Love Buzz was. The only thing about Love Buzz that at the time, so many of the stories of Nirvana become apocryphal, but because it was a cover, in some ways it wasn't taken quite as seriously as if it had been their own song. But it was a great cover, that's for sure.
It was an awesome record. And if I do say so myself, I'll share an anecdote. We released the single, and a few days later, Charles called me at Sub Pop, and he goes, we threw a party last night, and we put Love Buzz on, and it just kept getting played over and over again. And that was the first real feedback I had heard about this single. I'm thinking, if this can rock a party at Charles, this is going to be it. This band's going to be huge.
Gave it my stamp of approval, yeah.
Well, I wonder, Jack and Bruce, Jack, when you first recorded that demo, I mean, what was it about the songs that made you feel like you wanted to pass it on to Bruce and John? And then Bruce, I mean...
Well, instrumentally, it was
similar
basically,
question.
to my ears, it was basically 70s hard rock. It owed a lot to the Melvins. It was a little proggy and angular and post-punk and weird, but basically it was riff rock. But what set it apart was the singing, actually, and I thought his voice had a particular character to it that I thought was pretty impressive. And just his whole vocal approach just kind of blew me away. I thought, this guy's, it's killer. Whatever becomes of this, I'm kind of a sucker for riff rock, so I was like, okay, well, this is pretty good stuff, but this singer's amazing. So that was it. And I kind of knew that the guys at Sub Pop would be like, well, what is this, metal? I mean, But, even Jonathan picked up on the singing thing. I mean, that was the thing. It was like the personality kind of came through and sort of made you curious about it. Like, whoa, what is this? Because it wasn't your run-of-the-mill hard rock singing, really. It certainly wasn't your stereotypical metal singing of the late 80s at all. It was a different thing. And there was something a little bit punk rock about the vocal approach.
Incredibly soulful vocals. Yeah, when I first heard the tape, I thought some of the arrangements were a little busy, kind of proggish, and I wasn't too crazy about it. My business partner, John, got the demo first and really lit up. He had to kind of sell me on a little bit. But we were both totally blown away with Kurt's voice.
I remember, I think the first time I ever heard Nirvana was working in the darkroom at Auto Trader, which was my crappy night job in the early years there. A lot of the film that I shot was appropriated from Auto Trader. But I remember hearing Floyd the Barber. They had it on a pot at KCMU, and that was well before they. I don't know where that was recorded.
It's the same version.
It's the same version.
We remixed it, but it's the same recording.
Yeah, and I remember not liking that so much. That's probably one of their most strangest arrangements.
Yeah, that was the hit for me off that tape.
Okay.
Well, I just want to say that for me personally, a lot of what ultimately appealed to me about Nirvana's first record and their first single had a lot to do with Jack and Endino. And I think it's one of the reasons the record did sell pretty good. In the first year and a half, it sold like 40,000 copies, which was a lot of records for an indie label at the time.
It still would be.
It still would be,
It would actually be maybe
that'd be
more
like
impressive number now.
And I really think a lot of its popularity had to do not so much with the songwriting, but the vocals and the rawness of the recording. I just love Jack's production, and it just really jumped out and had a real vitality to it that a lot of people could relate to.
I appreciate that, Bruce. Thanks.
I always found those early productions like really big sounding, like the Super Fuzz Big Muff, and then
Big for 8 tracks.
Yeah. No, I mean there's something to simplicity there,
Well, as the music critic on the panel, Jack Endino is Seattle sound. It's there. It's right here. This guy.
Come on, you guys.
Is
moving right along.
His sound. When everyone talks about the Seattle sound, it's not Nirvana. It's not Mudhoney. It's not Tad. It's Jack Endino. The magic is in that. And I think that often was overshadowed by the personalities. What happened is the personalities, particularly by 91 when Nirvana overtook the world, that particular essence was lost. And some of it was Charles's photographs as well, and what Bruce and John picked up beyond Nirvana. All the other unusual acts on the label affected it as well. And it became a label that people looked to because they knew they had great curators behind it. But Jack's sound, more than anything else, was the sound that kind of formed that. And even when Nirvana was with Butch Vig, I think that You didn't produce Nevermind last I checked. But
Yeah, afraid
I
not.
even think that some of the arrangements and
A
the way that
shame.
record comes together is informed by the earlier
Well,
stuff.
it is because all those drum arrangements, for instance, were written by Chad. Most of those songs were demoed when Chad Channing was in the band. And Grohl himself has gone on record as saying, "Hey, I was just playing Chad's drum parts on Nevermind. The stuff was already written. There was no reason to change it." And which is it's a pretty cool thing for him to point out, actually. Dave didn't really write the drum parts until In Utero. That's when you hear Nirvana with Dave Grohl, what they really sounded like, as opposed to Dave playing parts that had already been demoed with Chad Channing. So, in a sense, that Nevermind is still the older Nirvana sounder. It's like a transitional record to me. Nevermind has always felt a little weird to me because it always feels like it's between one thing and another, and I think that's partly why, because the stuff had already been demoed with the old version of the band.
And that's not even. And there's actually a couple of the tracks on Nevermind that there's one track we think actually has Chad on it, which he's not credited. So
I think you're right.
It's
actually.
it's
Is it something in the way?
exactly. And so it's Chad's parts, and we were talking backstage. I mean, I think it's a crime that Chad's not also going to be on stage with the band or being inducted. The Hall of Fame. When they induct a band, it should be every member of the band on the plaque, on the wall, every member that was in that. We got one right there. And that doesn't mean they should all play or all give a speech, but it does mean that legacy of everybody that was in that band is part of that honor. And if anybody's aware, I mean, Kiss is being inducted for the original lineup. Nirvana's being inducted for the lineup in 1990, which makes no sense.
Or 91.
91.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wonder if you guys have any particularly funny memories of Kurt or Nirvana. I mean, Charles, you mentioned backstage about Chris.
The first time I met Chris Novoselic was out at Bob Whitaker's cabin out on the coast. And Bob Whitaker, if you don't know, was the Mudhoney's manager and sort of grunge mascot.
Refreshments coordinator.
Yeah, all around madman. But anyway, he kind of, a bunch of us went out there, and all of a sudden we're at a bonfire on the beach, and then Chris was kind of a latecomer. He shows up. Next thing you know, he's jugging from a gallon bottle of wine or something, and he's got his clothes off, and he's jumping through the bonfire, and then he just takes off. Running down the beach until we don't see him anymore. And it was like, who the hell was that guy? That was kind of the first introduction to that crew. Yeah.
I have this very vivid memory of Chris. February 1990, Pine Street Theater, Portland. And we're backstage, and I look over at the couch, and there are all these springs, like, sticking out of the couch, and I realize, oh yeah, Chris has been jumping up and down on the couch for 10 minutes, and it's completely trashed. So I don't know if that's funny, but he certainly was fun-loving.
Well, I think that the weirdest thing ever was Nirvana's record release party for Nevermind at the Rebar. And it's this little club that 300 people at the most, maybe, if that. And at some point, the party's continuing, and there's major label money. It's not just Sub Pop, so there's free beer and there's free hummus for some reason. I don't know why. And they're throwing hummus. And then at some point, you look over, and I look over, and the Rebar, because it was super hot, there was a back alley entrance that had a piece of fencing on it, so you couldn't get through it. And I look out, and it's the alley, and there's Kurt, Chris, and Dave. They're not in the party. They're outside behind this fence like they're caged. They have been kicked out of their own record release party for starting a food fight. And they're looking in, and everyone's like, why aren't they here?
They so didn't want to be at that party. Anyway. It was just interesting, a little what Chris was talking about, their interviews there. I think they took, I don't know if it was just them, but it seemed, what came to my mind was they took cue from Mudhoney's playbook, which Mudhoney I don't think ever gave a serious interview in their career. And so I think that was kind of par for the course for the whole, Bruce and John with their whole world domination theme. And, I mean, we were just having fun at it. It didn't need to be that serious. That would have, like you said, it would have made it a chore.
Charles, could you share with us the story of Kurt in the UK coming out on stage in a wheelchair? And that's got to be one of their great pranks.
So at the Reading Festival, UK in 1992, rumors were swirling that Kurt was not well, that he's doing so much heroin that he wasn't going to show up for the gig, even though he curated the whole thing, and of course anyone that was backstage knew that they were playing and that they were there, but there was just this the rumors had been swirling, and I could tell people were not sure, and so Anton gets me to the side of the stage there before the show, and I turn around, and there's Kurt in a wheelchair. And I had seen him earlier in the day, just all smiling. He's in a wheelchair with a hospital smock on, and this big white wig, as if he was an old man, and he's sitting there smoking a cigarette with Everett True, pushing him. And Everett pushes him out to the mic stand, and he does this you can't get out of the wheelchair, and this is in front of 45,000 people, and they're just this hushed silence, people were clapping, and then they were like, what? And he gets up and he grabs the microphone and he falls down with it, just kind of plays, and then at a certain point he's like, oh, okay, he gets up and gets his guitar and they start, but it was pretty great.
Great story.
Before Nevermind is out, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of buzz. I mean, people really know that this is going to be huge. I mean, what was your sort of personal recollections of the time?
Well, the first time I heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was actually on a cassette tape in Susie Tennant's car.
Me too.
Imagine that. Yeah, and I thought, wow, this is, for them, it would just seem such a leap, and I thought, yeah, this is gonna be huge, they'd probably go out and open for Sonic Youth or something on this, yeah. I mean, we didn't know, I mean, yeah.
They opened for the Butthole Surfers a few months later.
And I think what Charles is saying, though, speaks so to the point, which is that what Huge was opening for Sonic Youth. I remember talking to you, Bruce, right, or at that record release party, or the idea of 100,000 copies, which was what Sonic Youth had sold. That was the upper reach. That would have been the biggest thing ever, and that's what people thought that were boosted of the band.
In the indie world, 100,000 would be like a platinum record.
Yeah, it was.
The first time I heard it was in Susie Tennant's car. I don't remember seeing you in the car. That's very odd.
I think she was just driving people around Seattle playing that.
But I remember being totally blown away, for sure.
I remember being on the road with Skin Yard, and we were somewhere in the Midwest and hearing it either at somebody's house or possibly even on the car radio. It might have just been "Smells Like Teen Spirit," because that's the first thing I remember noticing, and just kind of going, whoa, really? This is Nirvana, and it's on the radio, or wherever we were, because I don't think the record was out yet. And then immediately after that, we found ourselves in Europe in October, November of '91, and the record hadn't been released yet in most of the countries we were in Europe, but people had the tapes of it somehow anyway. We were we'd go to a club in, Oslo or Copenhagen or something, and people would be playing it over the PA. Yeah, this is the new Nirvana record. It's not out yet. And it was crazy. It was like the record was following us around.
Okay, Jack, just to riff on that. My wife at the time, Hannah Parker, went to a remote island in Thailand called Koh Tao, and she heard it being played out of a fishing boat. And they kind of in a fishing boat, I mean like a rowboat, with a guy with a string pulling up fish. And she went over there and said, "Oh my God, she was with a Thai friend, and they're like, this band's from Seattle," and he pulled out this cassette that was all in Thai. It had already been bootlegged. Okay. And this is, I don't know, maybe 4 months after it came out.
Yeah.
I think that there's an interesting sort of motif in that, because essentially it begins with your fanzine as the ground zero, as the patient zero for a lot of these things. And the idea of cassette culture, to me, to some degree, Nevermind is the end of cassette culture. At the point that that came out, believe it or not, in 1991, cassettes still accounted for something like 25% of all music sales. And of course, they just disappear around that time as CDs come. But when people think of Nirvana or they think of Kurt, I had the benefit at one point of actually finding one of his roommates who had all of Kurt's cassettes when he was a kid that he had taped, and all these mixed cassettes, and to see them, and you mentioned the Cars, there's so many other influences that don't get talked about, but to me, this is kind of the end of that. It's the end of mixtape culture. Things shift forever afterwards. And I don't think you can really understand the band or their influence unless you truly understand people like us that were music collectors, that collected tapes, that made a mixed cassette, that it was all these variety of influences. It wasn't one thing, and it wasn't a major label thing. It was just weird things on the radio with a variety of different influences.
Bruce, do you remember the shoebox of defective Bleach cassettes you gave me?
No, I don't, Jack.
Do you remember when Sub Pop decided to put out a cassette version of Bleach, but 2 of the songs had been shipped off to make the Blue EP, and those 2 songs were no longer on the master reels?
No, I don't, Jack.
And there was a whole shipment of 1,000 Nirvana cassettes that were missing 2 songs.
Welcome to the world of independent record labels.
So
I probably humped those damn boxes too.
I had nothing to do with this, but I ended up with this box of Bleach cassettes that were missing 2 songs, and we would use them in answering machines, record over them at the studio, put tape over the holes, and yeah, here's your demo, or whatever. And because we didn't have CD burners at that point, so everyone who made a recording had to walk out of the studio with a tape, and I would have these Bleach cassettes that basically Sub Pop had to eat.
Actually, Jack, they became valuable collector's items.
I know.
After when people started hearing the news that Kurt had passed, there was a huge vigil at the Seattle Center, just behind us. And I'm wondering if some of you guys could talk about just how momentous that is, that that many people would get together pre-internet era to celebrate somebody.
Well, we were talking a little bit backstage about, in some ways, it's this whole it feels nice. That video was so great because it kind of emotionally brought it back, but the whole weekend hasn't really felt great, and it's really momentous in some ways to think about. It was literally this time of day, 20 years minus 2 days ago, that memorial was happening. It was, or 3-4 days ago, it was on the 11th. And that many people gathered, no, it was on the 10th, it was on Sunday. We found out Kurt had died on Friday, and this thing happened less than 48 hours later, and 10,000 people gathered with no internet. It was a couple of radio stations blastering. I'm not even sure there was anything in the paper because the deadlines were such, and that many people came together that spontaneously. And it was truly extraordinary, that feeling. I mean, we were sort of saying, earlier that if that happened today in Seattle, there would be 200,000 people with the crowdsourced, but that many people got together and came truly showed how well he was loved, both by musicians and by other people. And it was kind of like you just didn't know what to do. And in some ways, that's even true to this day. You don't exactly know what to do. How do you honor him? How do you, for somebody that struggled with commercialism at times and his role, or struggled with how he felt with fame, what's the proper way to honor his legacy? And at that thing, the greatest thing was to see kids sitting around in circles playing guitar and singing songs. That was truly extraordinary to see that they were reinterpreting the music and making it their own. But it really was one of the most extraordinary events I've ever attended in my life.
I think ultimately we all wish that we weren't in this room right now, you know, just period. So, wish he'd lived on.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think that